Hi everyone, Kathryn from Antavo here. I'm joined by Adam Kitchen from Magnet Monster. Adam, could you jump in and tell us what it is that you do at Magnet Monster for D2C brands?
Thanks for having me. So, very quick intro. We do email, SMS, WhatsApp, and direct mail marketing, and we are a full service retention agency. So, we handle strategy, design, reporting end to end for D2C brands. We've been doing it for 7.5 years now, too long. And personally, I've been involved in e-commerce since I was 18, so half of my life at this point. And we are a Klaviyo Elite partner and full service retention agency to D2C brands.
Great, thank you so much for that. And yeah, retention is, I think the word on everybody's lips, certainly at Antavo, when we talk about lifecycle marketing, about loyalty, retention is such a huge part of that. And what we're here to talk about today, and I'm not going to sing it, but don't you forget about me. And this is all about building engagement between purchases, which, all the different methods that you just spoke about there are lots of different ways that marketers can use to engage with their users. And I know that you've got so much experience of this. I've been following you for a long time on LinkedIn. Historically, I used to batch and blast to 2 million subscribers twice a day. So I've used a lot of the tricks in the book as well. But I'm going to try and extract, if that's all right, Adam, extract as much information from you over the next half an hour for our audience. And we'd like this to be as interactive as possible. So if you're dealing with any issues with retention or building engagement in between purchases, please do comment. We're streaming on a few different platforms. So if those questions come through from other platforms, my colleague Barbara will put them into the questions here for us. So jumping straight in, if we're looking about what great engagement really means, taking away buzzwords, Adam, can you talk to us about what your customers mean when they talk about engagement? Is it frequency? Is it just relevancy? What are we talking about there with great engagement?
Well, for me, when people talk about engagement, it's almost like a proxy for getting someone to a second purchase, really. And ultimately, every brand that we sign up with and every prospect or customer I speak to, they use the term engagement by essentially saying, how can we either get someone who subscribes to the list to convert, or how can we get a customer to buy again? So engagement is just a tactic ultimately to try and get people back to the website to browse and buy again. And for me, our job is to find the optimal amount of touch points across all channels, the right frequency, and time it obviously when they're most likely to purchase, while offsetting any potential negative action like an unsubscribe, spam complaints, disengagement with the channel. So there's a bit of art meets science, but I think what we're really talking about is how do we get people to subscribe to actually buy, and how do we get people who bought for the first time to buy again, and when should we communicate with them and how frequently?
It is interesting that maybe there's an overuse of the word engagement rather than people talking about the metrics that their jobs and that the business is really reliant on, which is ultimately purchases at the end of the day. But we do find that there's lots of behaviors that sit behind those, being driven towards a purchase. So speaking about that, which metrics would you say actually matter? What do you normally track?
So I like to go upstream. I think one of the problems with being a channel specific marketer, which I am, I'm not bashing anyone, is that you can sort of live inside a bubble and you have to understand how the customer journey looks at from an all-encompassing view rather than optimizing just your channel. So I will always start looking at, for example, the cohort behavior, and when a customer subscribes or purchases for the first time, when are they likely to repurchase? And that's going to vary across every single brand. So whether you're selling, like we talked about yesterday, I always use this example, a mattress versus a supplement product, the repurchase behavior is going to be vastly different. So you need to optimize for essentially clicks within that time frame and find out what the optimal frequency is to send people back to the website. And if we say, for example, someone's going to drop off a cliff, which they usually do in consumer packaged goods after 45 days, then you need to find out how to stimulate as much engagement as possible when they buy in the first 45 days. And obviously there's a variety of things you can do and track there, but what I try and optimize for is as many clicks as possible within that first 45 days to get people back to the website to initiate the browsing sessions, especially if it's a one-time purchase store. If it's a subscription brand, for example, then it's quite different. You almost want to, I wouldn't say minimize the amount of touch points that you have with them, but the cadence and the customer journey is slightly different. And then again, if you are selling furniture or a mattress or something like this, then there's no need to send so many communications to people in the first 45 days. You almost want to pivot what the goal is to, for example, offset and CAC for word of mouth. So I think to answer your question, you need to understand the business, the purchase latency, and then critically, when that drop off is from first to second purchase, because that's your opportunity. And that's when you want to drive as much engagement as humanly possible.
So I'm sure a lot of people listening are thinking, that's great, but how do I know what that cadence is? Can you talk us through maybe how long, what you would run as a split test, how long you think it normally takes to work something like that out? I mean, I would always say iteration, constantly test, but how long would it take for somebody to find out, here's my sweet spot? Like you said, I think something you said before is really you want to, in that first 60 days, have as much communication as possible across as many channels, because it's very likely that somebody's going to lose interest after that. How did you discover that, and how could somebody go about testing if that's right for their brand or not?
Well, the amount of people who've signed up with us who've had this question, and then the obvious answer, right, is you do a holdout test between two control groups. But the reality is the enthusiasm to run those, because of the downside of abstaining from marketing to customers, usually not a lot of people actually follow through with what they say. They want to be data driven, and then the reality is they don't want to lose potential sales. So I think that is the obvious way to test it, is to have one control group versus another, where you're optimizing for a high frequency versus maybe a lower frequency or nothing at all, to see the true incremental impact. But I think you have to consider a lot of brands will struggle to reach statistical significance unless they're at a certain scale of volume anyway. And as I've said, the downsides of that is, let's say, if we're talking about D2C, a conventional repurchase rate, a good one is 25% within a year. So 75% of people are never going to buy from you. And if you have a new product drop or a new launch, are you really going to abstain from marketing to these people to get this perfect data in a holdout test? A lot of the times it's just not practical. So there is an element of, dare I say, fluff to it and just winging it. But the reality is I try and get as many touch points as possible in there, because I don't see unsubscribe necessarily as a negative. I think there's just an opportunity cost within that first 30 to 45 days usually, that you have to go in, and I don't want to say aggressive, but you need to throw everything at it to try and get people to convert again.
I think people are, marketers specifically are really afraid of a high unsubscribe rate. And, when I sent this essentially 5.2 million emails a day, they were very promotional. It was affiliate marketing. Everything was discounts and vouchers. And I, interestingly, only ever got a 0.01% unsubscribe rate, and my sender reputation was always really high. So for somebody that's thinking, well, I just want to make sure I protect my sender score, and I don't want to maybe hit somebody really often in those first few days, what would you say is the trade-off, and what is it they should be really looking out for and solving for in those kind of early points where they're trying to get through to that second purchase? Because a lot of companies only make money if they get a second purchase, right? Customer acquisition cost is so high just to get a customer in. It might be essential for profitability to get the second one. So yeah, how should they balance pushing for that against, maybe spam reports or unsubscribes?
This is, well, you'll know better than me probably, Kathryn, because it's your wheelhouse as well and your background. But if we're talking specifically about deliverability, there is an element of art meets science with it. Let's say but basic health practices like technical authentication, monitoring through Google Postmaster, etc. Without going into all the geeky stuff, that's the obvious basics. But how should you think about this? Well, the reality is, try and put yourself in the customer's position. How many emails they probably receive a day? It's anywhere from 100 to 200. Are you really bothering them that much? Okay, potentially, but what is the consequence of that? It's an unsubscribe. Now, what's the consequence of not emailing them or texting them? You lose the chance to get the sale. So there's always going to be a trade-off.
Yeah.
You don't market to people, you can't sell to them. And if you market to them too much, they churn anyway. But either way, if you don't market to them, there's no chance to drive the repeat purchase unless you obviously have a phenomenally strong product where they're just using it every day and they will buy again anyway. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to take into account there is an element of what's a good experience for the customer, but you also have goals as a brand that you need to hit as well. And this is a business, you live and die by your numbers. So if you're not selling to them again, then it doesn't matter. And I think the downsides of brand perception, etc., as long as you are not trying to be manipulative and deceiving people, they generally don't care. They'll just unsubscribe. So, and then they'll forget about you. People have got a lot more going on in their lives.
We just said, how do you make sure people don't forget about you? And you're right. So historically, I did deal a lot in email, but I've been out of it. And actually, I left it as personalization was really growing. So I'd be really interested to know what kind of uplift you see in personalization. And I'm not talking personalization as in hi, first name. What other kind of clever pieces of personalization would you use, and how do you see that they work to maintain engagement between purchases?
So the obvious things are dynamic based on event data and flows, previous product history, etc. But I personally think, and I know some people will disagree with me, I think, yes, of course, personalized communication has much higher click rates and they drive much more revenue per recipient, but also the volume to scale that flows is hard to drive a significant uplift to justify the time investment. So I'm not implying everyone should go for generic batch and blast, but there is a resource allocation argument versus uplift. You can go super granular and segment people in 8 to 10 buckets, but most brands don't have the product assortments to justify that. And as I've said, even if they do drive an uplift and it's more personalized, you also have to consider you've created 8 to 12 ideations, 8 to 10 or 12 individual emails. That's a lot of volume that adds up really fast. And the problem is consumer behavior is very transient, and we like to think we know what people want and we can predict it. But the reality is, if you are selling, again, to use the famous supplements example, let's say you go and you purchase a product and the brand sells things that build muscle, lose fat, just for general health and well-being people. Just because someone signs up for a fat loss product or to use a protein powder in month one doesn't mean you should only communicate with them with personalized email around fat loss, because consumer behavior and goals changes over time. So actually there's an opportunity cost for marketing to them in a very singular way. So it's very nuanced, but I think obviously you want to make flows and triggered events. So if you have loyalty programs, of course, those emails are going to drive much better results than generic batch and blast. But you also need to consider the resource allocation, how that impacts profitability, and transient customer behavior. I've seen, and I've been guilty of this in the past, trying to be too clever, trying to think, you know everything about customers. And then I've compared it to control groups where I'm just going quite broad with the sense, and I'm spending less money and I'm reaching more people. And ultimately, to simplify email, it's a game of impressions largely. You get more revenue the more frequently you're able to stay top of mind. So yes, personalized content will always perform better, but there also needs to be realistic expectations on how that's going to impact the resources and infrastructure. Just a final point on this, so it doesn't drag on. Obviously, AI is going to change things massively here, and it already is. That's going to enable this like one-to-one scale, personalization at scale. But that's another topic for another day.
We could definitely easily spend a half an hour on that. And yeah, I think what we see in loyalty is that basically you've got a really great, genuine reason to email the customer. So if it's that they've got points expiring, or they've earned some points, or they can earn some points by doing something that's not purchasing, it gives you a great reason to email that's beyond sending another discount code or an offer or a sale. So it just gives you that really genuine reason to be able to contact your audience in between. But something you touched on there is a bit about the kind of journey. And I'm interested to know how it changes. So if I'm a brand, I know that I have customers that normally stay for 2.5 years. I guess there's different tactics I can employ with that. I can try and get them earlier. So what we see some of our customers doing is, actually using, deciding they're going to have an app and incentivize consuming content, not spending money. So that what they do is specifically get in with their audience younger. So if you've got 4 more years of spending, you're obviously increasing your lifetime value that way. So you can do that. You can increase the average order value, or you can increase the frequency of purchase. But it'd be interesting to know from you, how, the best brands that you see at building their lifetime value, how are they changing the communication with their customers throughout the journey? You said there about customers change. Just because they bought one thing doesn't mean that's what you're going to hit them with forever. So yeah, it'd just be great to know some of the most successful stories that you've been involved with, what it is that they did specifically.
So I think about this quite pragmatically, and again, I'm not trying to diminish or downplay the role that email or retention channels can play in this, but there's always going to be that power law distribution that we talked about yesterday, where a very small cohort of customers will drive a massive amount of revenue, especially if we're talking about the best customers, the highest LTV. So the key is to deeply understand that cohort of customers, what are the commonalities and the shared attributes between them, because that's who you want to acquire, and that's what's going to lead to high LTV naturally. There's so many tactical things that we think, and they do make a small difference to people, but the reality is the best way to get someone to stick around and spend a lot of money with you is to just find the people who naturally gravitate towards those products. So I was speaking to a client yesterday who had a retention problem, who sold juice cleansers. Now that category is always going to have a retention problem because people are looking for quick fixes, and they're not the type of people who will stick around and continuously have good habits, as opposed to, let's say you target someone who does yoga 5 times a week. Well, they are a much better person to sell wellness products to because they already have good habits. So you need to identify what that cohort is. And for a lot of brands, it's usually middle-aged women with high disposable income. That's just something that's fascinating I found. And I think most people are aware that women have the majority of spend in D2C. So if you can identify that cohort of people, the shared commonalities between them, and then pivot all of your acquisition to attracting more of them, then that's going to give you the best chance of success to increase LTV. Now, that aside, what can you do with general customers? My methodology on this is, it is a game of impressions and having the touch points at the right time for as long as possible until someone is obviously churned. And you need an all-encompassing strategy for that. So you need to look at not just email in a silo. You need to collect consent from the very first time that they visit and give yourself the best possible chance to reach them on as many platforms as possible. So that means email, it means SMS/WhatsApp, depending on if you're in the US or the EU or the UK, and then direct mail. And if you have things like loyalty programs, then that as well, because you're just optimizing for as many touch points across as many channels as possible over the course of a period of time until, as I said, that behavior naturally dips off. So that's how I think about it.
Great, and we've got a couple of questions really relate to what you just said. So first of all, Thomas asks, is email the best way to re-engage customers? And I'm really interested to know, how do you see WhatsApp and SMS pan out? You know, I think I'm always a little bit reluctant to put my mobile number into things because I have no idea what it means. If it's, you know, you don't get to see some T's and C's often, you don't know what that's going to look like in terms of communication. So yeah, how do you see those work for audiences and different types of brands?
So email is definitely the most cost-efficient way to re-engage people. However, if you look at the channel-specific behavior, as you all know, post 60, 90 days, there is a massive cohort of people who just disengage with the channel. And that is strongly correlated to the natural repurchase behavior, right? So if D2C brands, 20% of people will repurchase again and 80% won't. So obviously you're going to get a drop off for people who buy it and then they're not interested. The key is to identify the people, going back to the previous point, who are interested again and drilling down on them. However, it doesn't mean you can't and you shouldn't attempt to win people back. You absolutely should, and you should still continue to market to them, because not everyone buys within a 30 to 60 day time frame. A lot of people buy over a year, 2 years. Again, it depends on what you're selling. If you hit a point where you will hit a point definitely where you can't win people back over email at some point, you need to look at the next logical cost efficient channel. And if you don't have SMS or WhatsApp consent, then it's actually direct mail. Now, the key is to not just group, all the single time customers and then retarget them after 90 days with direct mail, because it'll be extremely expensive and it's pointless to do. What you want to do is identify the previously high LTV customers who aren't engaging with email, but they have, as I said, had a high purchase frequency, high LTV in the past. Now, they are absolutely worth going back to try and win back. So the key with win backs is picking and choosing your battles. Certain customers, low AOV, low lifetime value, single time purchases, just accept at some point that they're not coming back, or that it's pointless to even try. High LTV people, move through the channels, progressively move through them. And to answer your question on SMS, WhatsApp, I think my opinion is they are just sales channels. Yes, there is some like transactional comms, and there's some AI bots and interaction that you can do cool stuff with them. But ultimately, transactional comms and then sales announcements. You're not saying, I would not recommend doing blog posts and heavy contextual, long-winded educational touch points through SMS and WhatsApp. I think you should reserve them for the character limitations are short, so get to the point. If they're highly invasive, just use them for sales-related content.
Thank you so much. And I'm just looking at, there's some other questions here around personalization. And I know that you work with brands of varying sizes. Adam, Barbara has posted one in here, I think from another channel. And it's, does personalization work for small brands, or is it really something that works best for bigger enterprises?
No, it can definitely work for anyone. But the point is, as I mentioned earlier, to pick and choose your battles. Personalization might not be the best use of time and resources for a smaller brands. So there's still things you can do at scale for smaller brands. As I said, flows, it's no excuse to not personalize and use event data and previous historical data to trigger personalized comms off that. But if you're talking about specifically to campaigns, then the juice is not worth the squeeze a lot of the time. Bigger brands, of course, there's also there's so much you can do. It just depends on the scale, and as I said, it depends on the product assortments, the catalog, the different type of personas. There's lots of variables to consider.
So, and the reason why I chuckled just then is, what you were saying earlier is, first of all, you need to accept that a certain percentage of people are always going to be a one-time purchase. And as much as companies always want to push them to second time, maybe they can't. And I wonder if this is where AI would come in with helping to recognize particular behaviors, or just even kind of persona types that mean it would be worth going after particular one-time purchases. But Julia actually asked a question about the other end of things, which is how do you know when to stop investing in a customer and trying to re-engage them? So this might be some of those ones that you talked about that have had a high average order value. Maybe they've been with you for a long time. Is there a point at which you just decide you're going to stop trying to re-engage them, or would you continue to try and re-engage indefinitely?
So I would look at, first of all, you have to look at the purchase latency and understand when people buy again. Obviously, that's critical. And if they are a paying customer, not just a prospect in the database, then they need to be treated differently. I think if someone's still engaging with the content, then obviously you want to remarket to them. But we'll use our supplement example because it's easy. Let's say, the chances of buying again, 80% of people are not buying again past 45 days. Then if they are not engaging with email or channels and they're a low AOV customer or low LTV customer, then at some point within that retention curve, you need to just consider, is it worth the cost to continuously remarket to them? If they're still engaging, then it's fair game. Or if they haven't opened the communication in, let's say, 6 months, it's not binary, like there's clear rules on this, but I'm just giving you an example. And they're low LTV historically, then, you need to, as I said, pick and choose your battles. And a lot of the time, efforts can be reallocated elsewhere.
Yeah. So I don't want to give away too many of your trade secrets, but when you first start working with a prospect, what do you normally see as the lowest hanging fruit? Like, what's the thing that you say to them? First of all, just start doing this. I think you're going to see results from it. If you don't mind sharing, what does that normally look like?
Scaling campaign frequency,
okay.
Finding out how they can send more. And then I would add to that, nearly all the brands I audit, irrespective of size, are still either using email alone or they're too email heavy and they're not proactively building consent across the other retention touch points, WhatsApp, SMS. Direct mail obviously is slightly different, but you need to start collecting that from the very first interaction to give yourself the best possible chance to scale those impressions. If we're talking about automation and flows, then a mistake I see all the time is people think they need net new flows and complex, triggered journeys. You don't. You need to go back and you need to optimize the big four: the welcome flow, the abandoned cart, the post-purchase, and the browse advancements. They will drive 90% of revenue for the overwhelming majority of brands. So just go back and test them and re-optimize them as opposed to adding net new complexity. Simplify and go back to basics.
Yeah. I mean, we see, where people are using loyalty to harness more, I would say, zero-party data. So, like we have gamified profiling. People can earn points for sharing more of their data, which is really worth it for both the business and for them. So they're getting something aside from just points when they purchase, perhaps. But what it means is you can really, you can know perhaps a bit more about them to know what to send them, where they're at, what their preferences are, what they like, what they might be looking to buy next. I mean, years ago, I think people used to purchase that data. I don't even know if that's something that's still kind of with all of when GDPR came in. I'm not sure how much that changed, but certainly we see our customers having a lot of success where they build out those profiles, really understand their customers. And we have the optimizer too. So as you were saying about understanding your data earlier, where do you see those dips? Where is it people drop off? We've kind of built out that because not everybody has a business analyst, working for them full time. So we try to give them that in their back pocket just to be able to find some of that data. So that would also really help inform what to do with the emails, when to send more, when to send less, and maybe even when to switch to a different format, be it SMS or WhatsApp, or even direct mail. So unusual to get something in the post now. I'm guessing that it can be really effective for some customers.
Yeah, and just to touch on, there's so much data. People are swimming in data. I don't think lack of data is a problem. It's context and what to actually do with that. That's the big challenge for any brand or business. It's knowing how to action things to actually build a strategy that makes a difference as fast as possible. That's the big, and that's obviously why people like us exist. That's our job.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you're obviously working heavily with Klaviyo. Just wondering if there's a particular thing that you see teams using Klaviyo should think about earlier than they normally do.
Good question.
I thought I'd throw a difficult one at you in our last minute or so.
The only thing, the thing I will say is not to just look at Klaviyo as a email tool. I know they've moved towards this direction for a while, but you can house all lifecycle marketing within Klaviyo. So just making sure that all those integrations are synced and speaking together, and that you're consolidating as much as possible under one roof, I think is very important for data integrity and then scaling like all lifecycle marketing. So that would be, I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit because it's not, but it's definitely, again, I think most brands should spend some time to actually make sure that all their tools are harmonized and speaking to each other because it's a better customer experience.
Great. So I think, what you, in summary, it's really about keeping the communication up as regularly as possible with people. I do the same as you would in a friendship. Like, we often talk about loyalty and how you're basically building a relationship with your audience. And yeah, if you didn't hear from somebody for months, you'd wonder if they'd completely forgotten about you. So I think, what you are saying just says, speak to your customers as much as you possibly can, find something of value to give you a reason to be able to communicate that with them. And if it's not via one channel, try something else before completely giving up.
Absolutely agree.
Great. Is there any final takeaways that you'd like to share with the audience today?
Yes, sign up with us and pay our retainer fee, and we can do everything we've discussed today for you.
I'm just going to check with the team if there's any other questions, and if we've addressed them all. We have done. That's great. So thank you so much, Adam. It was really useful to hear from somebody that does this day in, day out. I think one of the most interesting things there is when people talk about engagement, what they're really talking about is purchase rate. And as much as we want to, call that lots of different things, that's even when people are looking for loyalty or prospects are looking for loyalty, what they're looking to do is to increase their core business metrics, which is move from first purchase to second purchase, and move them up to preferably being the VIPs, who we often see make something like 8 times the revenue of a one-time purchaser. So yeah, it'd be great if people have been able to take away from this some top tips that they can use to get their audience even more engaged than they are currently. So great. Thanks so much for your help. Really nice to have you on today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.